In the early hours of October 21st, 2024, a quiet morning in Falls City, Washington, was shattered by an unimaginable tragedy. 5 members of the Humiston family, Mark, Sarah, Benjamin, Joshua, Catherine, were found dead in their home. The youngest, an 11-year-old girl, survived the massacre, escaping through a window after playing dead to avoid detection. As investigators pieced together the scene, a chilling revelation emerged. The 15-year-old son, who had initially called 911, was arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder. What led to this horrific act? Was it a sudden eruption of violence, or was there a deeper, more disturbing story beneath the surface? This is the haunting tale of the Falls City family massacre. Mark and Sarah Humiston were the kind of couple that made a quiet impression. Mark, 43, worked as a technical engineer, known for his precision and calm demeanor. Sarah, 42, chose to stay home, dedicating her time to raising their children and staying active in school PTA meetings and local food drives. The family lived in a modest 2-story home on Lake Alice Road southeast in Falls City, Washington, a peaceful tree-lined stretch that hadn't seen serious crime in years. Together they raised 5 children. Their 15-year-old son, now charged in the killings, had a reserved nature. He was intelligent, often lost in books or behind a computer screen, and rarely socialized. Benjamin, 13, was the opposite, outgoing and known on the middle school basketball team for his determination. Joshua, 9, had a budding fascination with space and wanted to be an astronaut. Catherine, just 7, had a love for painting and was often seen chalking up the driveway with her sister. That sister, only 11 years old, is now the only living witness to the massacre. From the outside, the Humistons looked like a well-balanced family. They took part in neighborhood events, sent polite holiday cards, and kept to themselves without ever raising concern. Friends described them as stable. Teachers spoke highly of the children's performance in school. There were no past incidents, no visits from law enforcement, and no signs of distress that would suggest what was to come. But as authorities now dig through school records and personal interviews, quiet inconsistencies are starting to surface. Reports of increasing isolation from the eldest son, teachers noting a drop in participation, even neighbors mentioning fewer backyard games and more drawn curtains. These weren't warnings per se, but they paint a more complex picture in hindsight. What makes this case so haunting is that it didn't come with sirens or shouts. There were no police calls or neighbor complaints, just silence. And then everything changed. The Humiston home, once filled with everyday family sounds, became the scene of a crime that would grip an entire nation. How could a tragedy of this scale unfold so quietly, so undetected? It's a question that now echoes in every room of the house they once called home. It was a Monday like any other in Falls City, Washington. Overhead, the first light filtered through the dense evergreens surrounding Lake Alice Road. The Humiston house, modest, tucked back from the street, surrounded by stillness, gave no immediate clue that something horrifying had just occurred inside. At 7:13 a.m., the King County Sheriff's Office received a 911 call from a 15-year-old boy. His voice was composed, almost unnervingly so. He reported that his 13-year-old brother had shot their family before turning the gun on himself. Deputies were dispatched immediately. When they arrived, the silence outside the house was pierced only by the distant calls of birds and the crunch of boots on gravel. Inside, a different world awaited. The front door gave way to a scene few first responders ever forget. Mark and Sarah Humiston were found in the master bedroom, each shot multiple times. Their children, Benjamin, 13, Joshua, 9, and little Catherine, just 7, were discovered in separate rooms. The family's handgun lay near Benjamin's body, consistent with what the 15-year-old had claimed. But something didn't add up. Crime scene investigators noted the lack of gunshot residue on Benjamin's hands. The entry wounds on his siblings weren't consistent with a single rapid confrontation. Meanwhile, across the property line, a neighbor answered a knock from a terrified, barefoot child. It was the Humistons' 11-year-old daughter. She was trembling, clothes torn, her arms scratched from brambles. Her words came in bursts. She'd hidden under a blanket, heard the shots, then climbed out the window when it was quiet. She had seen who held the gun, and it wasn't Benjamin. Her account shattered the narrative. She told investigators that her older brother, the same one who had called 911, had walked from room to room with the weapon. She'd watched him reload. She had played dead, waited, and escaped when she was sure he was gone. Deputies moved swiftly. The boy was taken into custody without incident, still inside the house. His demeanor was calm, cold. What had happened inside those walls during the early morning hours? What could push a teenage boy to orchestrate a calculated act of violence against his entire family? And why did he try to frame his younger brother? Those answers, investigators soon discovered, would be buried in layers of deception and silence. At 7:45 a.m., October 21st, 2024, an 11-year-old girl was seen running barefoot along Lake Alice Road in Fall City. She was shaken, covered in dirt, and barely coherent as she knocked on a neighbor's door. Inside her home, her parents, Mark and Sarah, and her siblings Benjamin, Joshua, and Catherine were already dead. She had survived by pretending to be dead. Investigators say she stayed hidden in her room as the shots echoed through the house. Peering out, she saw her 15-year-old brother, Matthew Humiston, armed with a shotgun. She lay motionless, waiting in silence, then climbed out a window and ran for help once the noise stopped. Her testimony didn't just reveal what happened, it changed the entire direction of the investigation. Earlier that morning, Matthew had called 911, claiming Benjamin had killed everyone, then himself. But his sister's statement contradicted that, and the physical evidence backed her up. The placement of the bodies, ballistic trajectories, and the condition of the weapon, all of it pointed away from Benjamin. Matthew's story fell apart, piece by piece. Her courage under unthinkable circumstances didn't just save her, it ensured the truth wouldn't be buried with her family. Her account became the backbone of the case, the moment that turned suspicion into certainty. At 6:57 a.m. on October 21st, 2024, a 15-year-old boy dialed 911. His voice was eerily calm. He told the dispatcher that his 13-year-old brother had murdered their parents and siblings, then taken his own life. He claimed to be the only survivor. When King County deputies arrived at the home on Lake Alice Road, they found the teen waiting outside, hands raised, unarmed. Inside the house, the horror spoke for itself. 5 family members, Mark and Sarah Humiston, and their children Benjamin, Joshua, and Catherine, had been shot while they slept. A .22 caliber rifle was found beside Benjamin's body. At first glance, it looked like a horrific murder-suicide, but the illusion didn't hold. Detectives began to question the story. Forensics revealed no fingerprints or gunpowder residue on Benjamin's hands. The trajectory of the bullets didn't align with the self-inflicted wound. The blood patterns around his bed showed no sign of movement after death. He had not even stirred. Even more damning was the testimony of the 11-year-old daughter who had survived the massacre. Hidden under a blanket, she had watched as her older brother methodically moved through the house. She only escaped by feigning death and climbing out of a window once he left the room. Her account to investigators was graphic and unflinching, matching the timeline and the physical evidence in unsettling detail. Faced with this new narrative, the 15-year-old's story began to crumble. He changed his account multiple times. At one point, he couldn't recall whether he was inside the house during the shootings or outside calling for help. Investigators noted that his behavior during interrogation was not typical of someone in shock. The staged scene was deliberate. Placing the rifle next to his younger brother was not a mistake, it was a calculated attempt to mislead. Prosecutors believe it was planned, that he waited for the early morning hours when everyone was asleep, and then carried out the killings in silence. His defense would later argue that the forensic evidence didn't conclusively place the gun in his hands, but the cumulative weight of the investigation, the physical clues, the survivor's statement, the inconsistencies in his story, all pointed back to him. Why would a teenager do this? That question, haunting and unanswered, looms over every piece of evidence. The investigation into the Fall City family massacre began in the pre-dawn stillness of October 21, 2024. Detectives from the King County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Humiston home on Lake Alice Road to find a scene that was both methodically brutal and emotionally staggering. 5 members of the family, Mark and Sarah Humiston and their 3 youngest children, were found dead, each killed in their own bedrooms. The house was quiet. Too quiet. There were no signs of a break-in, no evidence of a struggle, and nothing had been stolen. What stood out immediately was the precision. Each victim had been shot multiple times. The shots were targeted, not frantic. There were no errant bullets lodged in walls or furniture, just the bodies, and the silence they left behind. The call that brought authorities to the home had come from the 15-year-old son, calm, composed, and eerily detached. He told dispatchers that his 13-year-old brother, Benjamin, had murdered the family and then killed himself. But from the moment deputies walked in, things didn't add up. The crime scene suggested premeditation, not panic. The murder weapon, an AR-15-style rifle, was found next to Benjamin's body. Yet it bore no fingerprints, an anomaly for a suicide. Gunshot residue tests later confirmed that Benjamin had not fired a weapon that morning. There was also no blood spatter or recoil pattern consistent with a self-inflicted shot. Then came the most critical piece of evidence, the testimony of the 11-year-old daughter, who had survived by sheer instinct. In a whisper to detectives, she explained how she had played dead after witnessing her brother methodically shoot their siblings. She described how he reloaded the weapon, moved from room to room, and executed each family member with chilling precision. Her account was detailed, consistent, and aligned with forensic findings. When confronted with the discrepancies between his story and the evidence, the 15-year-old offered little in response. No visible signs of remorse. No attempts at justification, just silence. Investigators searched for a motive, combing through the teen's digital footprint, journals and school records. Nothing surfaced, not a single warning sign of what was to come. For the prosecution, the evidence formed a compelling narrative. The staging of the crime scene, the methodical killings, and the attempted framing of a younger sibling all pointed to a clear intent to deceive. They moved quickly to charge the teen with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The defense, however, pushed back. They argued that the crime scene was more ambiguous than it appeared, claiming the possibility of a misinterpretation. Their central argument, the suspect's version, although shocking, remained forensically viable. They maintained that without a confession, and with no clear motive, the burden of proof had to be met with caution. But as more evidence emerged, including text messages from the suspect the night before, indicating anger toward family members and searches for firearm handling, doubts about his innocence began to fade. Still, the lack of a stated motive left a haunting question dangling over the case. What could drive a 15-year-old to orchestrate such a calculated and devastating act? This wasn't just about a family tragedy, it was a forensic mystery, a psychological enigma, and a courtroom reckoning all at once. As the legal process unfolded, one truth became inescapable. Behind the quiet facade of the Humiston home, something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Fall City is the kind of place where everyone knows each other by name. A town of just over 2,000 people, nestled between evergreen ridges, where porch lights flicker late into the night and children play freely in open yards. When news broke of the Humiston family's deaths, the shock hit like a thunderclap. Neighbors didn't just hear about it, they felt it. Word traveled fast. Some heard the sirens in the early morning, others were alerted by local news flashes. The idea that a 15-year-old boy, someone many had seen walking to school, skateboarding by the general store, could be behind the massacre sent waves of disbelief through the community. It wasn't just the horror of the crime, it was who was accused of committing it. At the Fall City Library, where Sarah Humiston once volunteered for Children's Reading Hour, candles and flowers began to appear. By dusk that same day, dozens of residents had gathered. No one knew what to say. Tears flowed freely. Silence said more than words could. A vigil was held that weekend. Hundreds showed up, students, church members, old friends. A long row of framed photos of the victims stood against a stone wall, lit by flickering tea lights. Handwritten notes and drawings from classmates of Joshua and Catherine lined the ground. One read simply, I miss recess with you. The entire front lawn of the community center became a tapestry of grief. Grief counselors were brought into the local elementary and middle schools. Teachers struggled to maintain composure. One student, a close friend of Benjamin's, told reporters, "We all thought they were such a nice family. I don't understand how this could happen." Counselors stayed for weeks, offering open-door sessions for students and staff trying to process the loss. Online, the story exploded. National outlets descended on Fall City, and suddenly, a tight-knit rural town found itself under a microscope. The attention brought tension. Some residents welcomed the coverage, hoping for answers. Others resented it, calling it intrusion disguised as empathy. Local businesses posted signs asking media to stay away. Amid the chaos, the town's focus shifted to the one surviving child. The 11-year-old girl, now orphaned, became the center of collective concern. A fund was quickly established by local churches and PTA members, raising thousands within days to support her care and therapy. She was placed under the custody of her maternal grandmother, far from the media glare. For Fall City, healing will take time. The homes are still there. The streets are the same. But something has shifted. Trust, safety, the illusion of knowing what goes on behind closed doors. All of it, shaken. In the weeks following the massacre, investigators began the difficult task of understanding why a 15-year-old boy could carry out such a calculated act of violence against his own family. Interviews with surviving relatives and acquaintances painted a complex picture of the teenager, quiet, intelligent, but increasingly isolated in the months leading up to the killings. School records showed a recent decline in academic performance. Teachers noted a shift in behavior. He had become withdrawn, occasionally argumentative, and more reluctant to participate in class discussions. A school counselor had recommended psychological evaluation months earlier, but there was no indication that professional help had ever been sought. At home, there were signs of tension, though nothing that suggested imminent danger. The family, by most accounts, was private but appeared loving. No history of domestic violence was reported, and neighbors described the Humistons as reserved but kind. Yet the boys' internet history revealed a different story. Investigators uncovered extensive online activity centered on violence, mass shootings, and dark philosophical forums. He had researched past family murders, gun laws, and even studied forensic science websites, looking up terms related to blood splatter and body positioning. Prosecutors believed this pointed to premeditation. In interviews, forensic psychologists examined the possibility of emerging personality disorders. One expert suggested traits consistent with narcissistic and antisocial tendencies, including a lack of empathy and a desire for control. There was speculation about suppressed rage, possibly tied to unspoken family dynamics, feelings of inferiority, resentment, or perceived favoritism. Though no conclusive diagnosis has been made public, the prosecution argued that the methodical nature of the killings, including the attempt to stage the scene as a murder-suicide by blaming his younger brother, revealed a disturbing level of emotional detachment. This wasn't a case of a sudden breakdown or momentary loss of control. It was a carefully constructed sequence designed to mislead and manipulate. And perhaps most chilling of all, even after the murders, he maintained a calm demeanor, giving a detailed but fabricated 911 call. That level of composure, investigators say, is what makes this case so psychologically haunting. In the search for a motive, the truth remains layered, not just a story of what was done, but a window into a fractured mind concealing years of quiet turmoil. The arrest of the 15-year-old Humiston boy sent ripples through the legal community, not only because of the shocking nature of the crime, but because of the defendant's age. Prosecutors acted swiftly, charging him with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. They indicated their intention to try him as an adult, a decision that could change the course of his life. In Washington state, trying a 15-year-old as an adult requires a decline hearing. During this hearing, judges examined several criteria: the minor's maturity level, any criminal history, the brutality of the offense, and the public's interest in safety. In this case, the deliberate act of eliminating nearly an entire family, combined with the effort to stage the scene, suggests a calculated decision that will likely influence the court's ruling. If convicted in adult court, the teen could face a sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. But such a sentence raises ethical questions. Can a child truly comprehend the weight of such an act, or is this an instance of untreated mental illness and accumulated trauma left to manifest in violence? The defense team has challenged the narrative laid out by prosecutors. They've pointed to possible flaws in how evidence was gathered, raising concerns about the conditions under which the suspect was questioned. They argue that the forensic evidence, though compelling, does not definitively prove intent or premeditation. Meanwhile, the 11-year-old survivor has become a symbol of both resilience and tragedy. Her statement was critical to the early stages of the investigation, and she remains under close care with extended family. Whether she will testify remains uncertain, but her presence is a reminder of what was lost and what remains at stake. Outside the courtroom, the case has sparked urgent debates across Washington. Officials are re-examining how firearms are stored in family homes, the thresholds for mental health intervention in minors, and the legal gray zones surrounding juvenile justice. The decisions made in this case may well influence legislation for years to come. As the trial approaches, one thing is certain: the outcome won't just determine one boy's fate. It may redefine how society balances justice, accountability, and the possibility of redemption for youth charged with unimaginable crimes. What happened in Fall City was more than a headline. It was a fracture in the foundation of a family, a community, and a sense of safety that once felt unshakable. The deaths of Mark and Sarah Humiston and their three youngest children, Benjamin, Joshua, and Catherine, sent shockwaves not only through their neighborhood, but across the nation. This wasn't a tragedy brought on by an intruder or a random act of violence. It came from inside the home, and that fact alone continues to haunt those who knew them. The 15-year-old son, once seen as just another teenager in a quiet rural town, now stands at the center of a legal and moral storm. Investigators allege he meticulously staged the crime scene, falsely blaming his 13-year-old brother, and calling 911 in an attempt to mislead police. While his defense insists the forensic evidence supports his story, authorities argue otherwise. With prosecutors seeking to try him as an adult, the consequences could be lifelong. The sole surviving sibling, just 11 years old at the time, became both a victim and a crucial witness. Her decision to play dead after witnessing the horror, then escape through a window and seek help, was nothing short of extraordinary. Her bravery has given investigators vital clarity, but it also leaves her with trauma few can comprehend. She now lives under the care of her grandmother, away from the house that once held her family. For Fall City, this wasn't just a crime, it was a rupture. Candlelight vigils, fundraisers, and community meetings have become part of the healing process. Teachers, neighbors, and friends have stepped in, not only to mourn but to protect and rebuild. True crime stories often search for motives or logic, but some stories resist tidy conclusions. This one challenges us to confront the unknowns: mental health, family conflict, missed signs. It forces us to ask how we protect our most vulnerable, and what justice truly looks like when children are at the center of both the tragedy and its aftermath. If this story impacted you, leave your thoughts below. What do you believe justice means in this case? Subscribe for more true crime investigations where every story is a reminder of how fragile and how precious life truly is.